Hi everyone. Good morning for those of you with me on the West Coast, and good afternoon to the rest of you. We'll get started. It's just 10:01 on my time here. Wanted to introduce myself. I'm the Vice President of Brand Strategy for the Schawk retail practice, and I gave this presentation at the Private Brands Movement in Chicago, and it was interesting because Vice President Joe Biden was in the hotel where the conference was. So I was a little nervous presenting something about being un-American when Joe Biden was in the hotel, and there was lots of security and dogs and whatnot. So it was a little dramatic, but it was all good, and I'm happy to share the presentation again. The presentation will also be featured as an article in Private Label Buyer's November issue, so take a look for that. So today I'm going to talk about why private brands are un-American and what you can do about it. So I'm going to jump into things, which is pretty American, right? 47%. Now I know a lot of us are pretty familiar with that number, probably for most of us a little painfully familiar. We've seen a few numbers fluctuate. We're talking private brand penetration in the UK market from a dollar perspective, not unit. And I know here, as American marketers, we're all painfully familiar with that number and try to figure out how we can see some of our own penetration creep up closer to that number. And so what I'm here to talk about today is what's happening there that drives that number versus what's happening here, and what we can do about it to perhaps shift our strategies to drive more accelerated growth. So our perspective today, was it the Beatles? For some reason, this country is a bit obsessed with the UK. It may have started with the Beatles, it could have started with the Founding Fathers, but we've always got our eye across the pond on what's happening in the UK, and private brands is really no different. But what I'll do is I'll focus on the UK marketplace, but I'm also going to bring in a global perspective. Here at Schawk, we work with the world's largest retailers, so we're working with Woolworths in Australia, Tesco in Asia, HBC in Canada, and some of the big retailers here in the US. And so I'll try to bring that global perspective as well. And the last thing I want to bring up is from that perspective, we'll develop implications for the US marketplace and for private brands marketers. And I want to make sure that I reinforce the message of avoiding a forced approach. So we hope that our countries are very similar. We know that the colors of the flag are pretty similar, but is that really it? The reality is we're pretty dissimilar, and I'll talk a bit about that today. We'll look at, is it that the UK is that much better than us when it comes to private brands? Or is it a country maturation? So we'll look at a little bit of that, and we'll hope to understand that. So we went on a quest to understand it. Why is it that the UK can generate 47% share and we're hovering, FDMX, around 18%? So what we decided is it starts with behavior. And look, we even spell it differently. If we spell it differently, how are we expecting people to act the same? So retailers need to better understand their data, which is pretty much behavioral. And I feel, and I'll talk a bit about that retailers underutilize their card data. We have a lot of behavioral knowledge, but what we don't have is a lot of attitudinal. So we don't understand the whys behind the behavior. And we need to do a deeper job with our data to uncover those behaviors. So we'll look a little bit about that today from a macro level of what sort of the behavioral distinctions are between US and UK. Before we go into deep diving on behavior, we're going to look at the role of the retailer and how that influences behavior. We're also going to look at what's worked in the US. It wouldn't be an American presentation without being a bit ethnocentric, right? And so we'll look at what's worked and where we can borrow from those learnings. And then I'll also talk about implications, and again, reinforcing that we shouldn't force fit that approach. So when we went on this quest to uncover what really is driving this behavioral difference between the US and UK, we referenced a great book called The Culture Code by Clotaire Rapaille, who started off as a psychiatrist working with autistic children and developed a model by asking participants in research, qualitative focus groups, if you will, about their first experiences with the brand, he thinks that you can get to the rawness and to understand that culture code. And how he defines culture code is the unconscious meaning we apply to any given thing, a collective cultural unconscious, if you will. So he uses this collective unconscious to help marketers better understand how to talk about their brands. So he asked Americans what the culture code for America is. Now, when I was giving this presentation previously, I asked the room to guess, and I actually asked some British marketers in the room to guess, and they were a little bit reluctant to guess in fear of offending the American population in the room. But they guessed greed, and they were close, but it was dream. So, which makes a lot of sense, the American dream, right? I mean, we all know that phrase. This country was built on the notion of dreaming of a better life. The founding fathers came over and built a new government on the notion of a dream of separating church and state, for example. So how has the heritage of retail played within our behavior? So we know our country's vast, right? The geographic footprint is huge. Therefore, starting with the founding fathers and everyone who's emigrated since, this country is built on this desire to expand, right? So how does that influence retail? How does that influence purchasing behavior as it relates to private brands? And I'll get into that. The other notion that we can't ignore is here in the US was where we started the whole supersizing notion of retail through supermarkets, started by Michael Cullen in the 1930s through the retail King Cullen. For those in the tri-state area, I'm sure you're quite familiar, but they were the first supermarket model. And then everyone followed suit in the US. Additionally, because of that vast geographic footprint and supply chain channel distribution issues, there was a regional fragmented experience with banner brands. There still is today. A lot in some channels like grocery, we've got regional brands. And other channels like pharma and mass, through consolidation, we've been able to consolidate under one brand, but I think we're still sort of making up for that time where the regional fragmented experience to consumers. So because of that, retail became a transaction, right? We became the place to sell stuff. And we became a very big transaction, and we still are. I mean, that's the American way, right? We always want more. And we're still proliferating SKUs. So there's been a 15 to 20% increase in SKUs over the past decade. And that's our heritage, and that's still happening today. So what does this mean for brands? As a nation, we need to remember we are expansionists or dreamers. And that we also know that the role of brands just inherently, and this is just a quick definition, I could do a separate presentation on the definition of a brand, but bear with me. Really, brands are to help us get to a solution, provide an intimate relationship, they're built from trust, they bring a sense of belonging to a larger community, and they provide a thread of comfort. So as we expanded as a nation in this vast geographic footprint, guideposts are needed along the way. I mean, think about it. People are charting new territories and meeting new people. I mean, this is our heritage. So as we expanded, we need sort of a piece of comfort or a guidepost to make sure that we still belong to something larger, that we're not alone in this sort of expansionist mentality. And that role was really fulfilled by national brands, historically. Then a pivotal time in our history came in the post-World War II, where everyone wanted American anything. I mean, it was our civic duty to buy and manufacture American stuff, to support national pride. So then the 1950s economic boom coincided with marketing boom, enmeshing the two in our minds. So really, the message of the American dream meant, and still does mean, consume stuff. Specifically, American national brand stuff. So there's no national retailers, right? At the time, there's only national brands. So it was our American duty to drink a Coke, drive a Cadillac. And the success of Mad Men still perpetuates the sexiness of this time, where it's still sexy today. And what I question is, I wonder if the next AMC show, instead of being about Don Draper, will be about Sam Walton or Steve Jobs and how they've transformed retail. And let's make that sexy and make that a dramatic TV series. So it should be noted, the English code for America is, sorry, and I was mistaken earlier, I said I asked a Brit, and she said greed. This is where she said greed. She was pretty close. Unashamedly abundant. Gosh, I wonder why they say that. So tomato, tomato, we say dream, they say unashamedly abundant. It's a harsh insight into the contrast of cultures, but it needs to be acknowledged, and we need to understand why. So we looked at the heritage of retail across the pond. Because of the geographic footprint, now I'm not talking about British expansionism here, I'm talking about turn of the century, UK retailers were local, smaller stores, positioned as arbiters of good taste. So think about it, the contrast. We were developing superstores, supersizing our stores through a supermarket, and they were positioned as an arbiter of good taste, providing selection. We were thinking about variety, more, still today, 15 to 20% increase in SKUs over the past decade, and they were thinking about being selective. So it's a subtle distinction, the word variety versus selection, but it needs to be acknowledged. The UK retailers have always treated their brands like brands. They push their suppliers to provide better products. They design with integrity and pride. Sainsbury launched their private label as far back as 1890s. And the generic concept of generic branding were tested in other European countries, but not in the UK. And they've evolved away from that Me Too design that's still very pervasive here in the US. So what does this mean? Well, they maintain that smaller geographic footprint. As a culture, we know the Brits historically are less likely to move far away. So they grow up with the retailer and then they continue to shop with that retailer as a parent, and it passes on from generation to generation. Where here in the States, we're more transient of a society. We move around. Now, I previously talked about the regional fragmentation of grocery stores. So you see where the banner brand and its meaning and memories and how you build a relationship with your shoppers and your consumers gets lost if you move away from where that retailer exists. Like I mentioned, they created an intimate relationship with their consumers as a result. So again, we say variety, they say selection. So therefore, through the transitive property, our dreams are unashamedly abundant. You could argue that's still the way they are today. So our private brands on code from the British perspective, or more importantly, what role can private brands play in a culture of unashamedly abundant? I mean, we need to remind ourselves that this is the DNA of our culture as we try to market our brands. So I mentioned we'll look a little bit at ourselves and what's working in the US, because we're not so lost. And we'll talk about what we can learn. You're not going to be surprised with the retailer examples here. You shouldn't be, at least. First retailer example that we hold in high regard is Trader Joe's. This shouldn't be any, the bullets here really shouldn't be any new information for anyone on the webinar, but if it is, great. But I think it's worth reinforcing. First and foremost, their banner brand stands for something. They have a unique positioning in the marketplace from a retailer banner brand strategy perspective. They have unique products and service to support that overall positioning. I will reinforce that throughout, but I definitely want us all to pause and think about that and ask ourselves, are we doing the same with our internal organization or our clients? Are we really pushing for that banner brand to stand for something? And how can we support it better through products and service? They're choiceful in their selection of items. Again, perhaps borrowing from the UK model of being more of an arbiter of good taste. It's selection, not variety. They're prudent in expansion, maintaining that intimacy. And they really believe and reinforce and activate against that nice sense of discovery. They investigate in new products. Oftentimes they're the first to introduce whether it's a flavor or a concept in a category, so they're not always fast following. And they believe in trotting the globe, not just going to conferences. They feel like that's, sort of old hat. But they're serious about new product development and finding trends that they invest in research done around the globe to find the new flavor, to find the new snack, to find the new product. The other example is Whole Foods, again, probably not much of a surprise. And you'll see a lot of the same comments starting to trend here, but the banner brand stands for something, and they have a unique product and service to support that. The employees speak about the brands and products passionately. Now, I don't know if you're a frequent shopper of Whole Foods, but it's hard sometimes to get through checkout without hearing the cashier either talk passionately about what you've just purchased, know it intimately well, or talk about something else that you may like. I mean, that's a critical sell-in opportunity, and it also just helps from a service perspective and an overall brand experience. They have a choiceful selection of items, so choiceful that they source locally. They understand the nuances of that regional fragmentation, and they source locally to accommodate. And they're also prudent in expansion. So what does this all mean? Well, it really means we need to mind the gap, and pun intended, it may be a little hokey, but Trader Joe's and Whole Foods could be more a bit like the UK model, and we'll see how Fresh and Easy performs over time. So they're positioning themselves as this arbiter of good taste, this intimate relationship, new products, pushing their suppliers to innovate for them. So we're not necessarily suggesting all retailers need to dramatically reduce their SKU count or their footprint, but there are some learnings here that I think we all can borrow, no matter how many SKUs in your store or how large your footprint. So we need to understand that we have a different set of challenges. Challenge number one. Our country is built on expansion. It's in our DNA, like I said. We've all emigrated for the most part. We've all emigrated because our ancestors felt like they could work hard and build a better life, that American dream. So that's still in the shopper DNA, and we need to remember that. So how can private brands reinforce that notion of expansion? Well, can we perhaps be the ones to provide something new, that sense of discovery? We can enable that appetite that insatiable appetite for new things. Or perhaps provide new areas within the store to explore. Challenge number two. U.S. banner brands have different relationships with consumers. Period, the end. It's a bit unfortunate to realize this in the U.S., but in the UK there's a much deeper, intimate relationship with that banner brand and what it means in the hearts and minds of their consumers and their shoppers than here in the U.S. because of the heritage, because of everything I just explained about national brands and that American pride. But that's just the reality, and we need to do a lot more aggressive work to compensate for that, and I'll get into that in a bit. The other reality too with this point is that regional fragmentation. For example, I grew up on Long Island shopping at Wallbaum's, and I've got great memories of going there every Saturday with my mom. It was my one-on-one time with my mom. And she'd allow me to pick out one sugar cereal if I helped her bag the items. And so I just have these great memories of learning how to strategically bag the items so that there was equal distribution of weight across all the bags. And I still hate it to this day when someone bags my stuff and they put all the heavy items in one bag and the other bag weighs like an ounce. So I just have these great fond memories of the Wallbaum's brand, but now I live in the Bay Area. So those memories are lost on me. And that's just the reality. So we need to overcompensate for that and build stronger brand affinity with our banner brands. They need to become the brand beacons, if you will, and those guideposts along the way. Challenge number 3. Private brands' portfolio strategies hinge on the banner brand. So everything I just said about our limitations with that banner brand and it being sort of standing for that place of convenience, that transaction. And now we develop our portfolio strategy to hinge upon that brand name. So this challenge is twofold. One is the limitations of what we're doing with our portfolio, and I'll get into that in a bit. And the other part is as we try to overcompensate for this lack of intimacy, now we're on a product. And she holds us. She puts us into her medicine cabinet or her pantry, or she feeds us to her kids or her dog. And that's a real intimate relationship. So we're able to build back some of that brand meaning and that emotional connection with her through our products. But what do we do when our banner brand name is on the products? We make them look and act and speak like and dress like the national brands. So therefore, when we lose that opportunity to connect with her and have our own strong point of view or our own personal voice, our own brand voice. We're just reflecting what the voices are next to us on the shelf. So we really need to think about that. We can use, and I encourage all of you to talk to your corporate marketing colleagues in your organizations and encourage them to use products to build that relationship in the corporate brand gap. Challenge number 4. There are certain limitations, even for the Brits. When you look at your portfolio, when you look at the penetration of private brand share, it varies category to category, even in the UK. There's strong penetration in more commodity, lower involvement type categories, and they even have price gap differences that are much greater in personal care and beauty, and penetration that's much lower in personal care and beauty. So we know that there's brand ceilings, if you will, for private brand permission. So we shouldn't ignore that. We should actually build our portfolio around that by being smart and being realistic with what's the potential for our brands by category lens. So what you can do, and this is where I get a bit patriotic. This is where Joe Biden came in and presented side by side. No, I'm just kidding. So we went from emulating, like I talked about, in a very fragmented retail experience across the country. We then had a very fragmented brand experience on shelf, where we looked like Charmin, we talked like Charmin in that aisle of the store, then we looked like Tide or Coke in that aisle of the store. So we went from emulating national brands. It didn't help us to build that intimate relationship, just reinforced that fragmentation. Then we went to admiring Tesco and Waitrose and Sainsbury, and all for the right reason. However, I'd argue we went from a very myopic SKU by SKU, category fragmented approach to a very broad, multi-category, price tiering approach. And I think we swung the pendulum a bit too far as a nation and as a group of marketers, if you will. I think we painted the portfolio with too broad of a brush. And today, retailers are conflicted, right? Often we get called in a lot of the times. It's like, hey, I have this brand that's over 2,000 SKUs. How do I create a strong brand look and feel? Because we know that's where we need to go. But yet, how do I compete in the category as we knew how, which is looking like the national brand, using the same claims, using the same color, et cetera, et cetera. So we're very conflicted. So we need to go from emulating, again, to creating. So in the frozen entree example, you know, historical retailer solution would have been, okay, we'll have our lean cuisine knockoff, then we'll have our healthy choice knockoff. And Safeway went about it in a different way. They saw a multi-category solution. They sought after fulfilling an unmet consumer need. And I encourage more retailers to think this way, to optimize across the right amount of categories, not too broad and not too narrow. We need to go from imitating, so instead of launching a Bounty Basics opening price point brand as a knockoff, CVS went the other way and developed something that didn't feel like a compromise. But actually, you kind of felt like you're in the know and you're pretty savvy to find this value brand that actually looks kind of good and isn't a compromise. So what do we see coming out of all this? Private brands have been successful in stores that offer a truly different experience. I can't reinforce that enough. You need to differentiate. So for an example, IKEA has done a wonderful job of differentiating from a retail environment perspective. I mean, think about how challenging it would be to push something like this through in your organization. Private brands have been successful where retailers have embraced innovation, and we see this in two ways. Innovate with form factor and formulation. I had the distinct privilege of working with CVS on the brand strategy for this brand Nuance by Salma Hayek, and we decided in order to build beauty equity for the CVS brand, we did not want to have just a blanket celebrity endorsement. We actually wanted to develop a distinct proposition. And so in talking with Salma, she talked very fondly about her grandmother, who was a cosmetologist, and would concoct these creams and fragrances in her kitchen growing up and using all ingredients indigenous to Mexico. So that was a real brand proposition that fulfilled an unmet consumer need. And Salma was intimately involved, working with the suppliers on putting together the right ingredients and the right formulation of product. So I encourage you all to push your suppliers to do more things like this. You can innovate, or instead of form factor and formulation, you can innovate with a distinct category strategy. Now this is also form factor with the resealable bags and snacks, but salty snacks is a tough category for retailers to crack from a private brand's penetration perspective. And as opposed to ripping off all the national brand leaders, Safeway went about it a different way with a unique brand proposition. Think about her needs, and they reacted. Private brands have been successful where retailers have made her feel special. Now this can be a humongous undertaking, or it can be something small. By training your cashiers to walk around the counter and hand you your bag. It's a great service nod, and it's a small, subtle change. Probably took about 10 minutes in training, staff training. Everyone knows how to walk around a counter. But it's those experiences that make her feel special and will probably have her come back again. So how can you make her feel special? I hope I reinforce this enough, and if not, I'm going to repeat myself one last time. Figure out a banner brand strategy. There is an incredible gap in the US market around identifying and articulating a unique brand strategy, brand positioning for your corporate or your banner brand. Then utilize it, create a strategic link to utilize your portfolio strategy and your product brand strategies to reinforce that. That's the way to win. And how can you do that? Well, you know how your consumers feel outside of your store, and you know how she behaves inside your store. So use that knowledge and embrace it like never before and invest in it. You need to understand the whys to the behavior in the card data that we know. And I encourage retailers, I feel like that's another area where we are definitely underutilized. Utilize your data in a much more robust way. Create special experiences for her. Could be grand, like IKEA, reformatting your entire store, or slight little service nods. Deliver a special brand to her. Think about her, think about unmet consumer needs. And how can you do this, to continue? Know how to activate. So know how to activate in store. Retailers talk a lot about, well, we own the store. We have the 4 walls that she's in, but we're not activating and capitalizing on that as much as I think we should. And leverage the infrastructure. You have your cashiers, you have a sales force right there at that point of purchase. For example, I was shopping at the CVS picking up the Nuance products for this presentation. And so I had a few in my cart, and I was checking out, and the cashier, as she's sort of checking me out, said, "Oh my God, this Nuance stuff is really cool. We're going to have a conference call with Salma tomorrow, and she's going to tell us all about these products, and they're all natural. Did you know they're all natural?" And She didn't know I worked on the brand, and I didn't tell her. But it was that engagement. Had I been just another shopper, that this was a new product that I was just testing, for example, that additional reinforcement of the product and brand benefits was key. And it also helps just from a shopper experience, and it'll get me to come back and return to that store. And last, one other comment on the previous slide. I'm going to go back for a second. Another way to leverage the infrastructure that I feel like retailers don't do enough is use your stores as test markets. Instead of prototyping, product typing. Launch stuff. See how it does. We're not doing that as much as we nearly should. So last but not least, again, we're going to come back, bring it full circle, and look at that 47%. And I'm not necessarily being depressing. I don't want to say we'll never reach that. I actually do believe in private brands' ability to grow. But we need to do it our way. So I suggest we take that 47% and we reach for 60%. Because why not? Let's be unashamedly abundant. Okay, thank you. Now I'll answer any questions. I know we're sort of close to the end of time, but thanks for your participation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay, one of the first questions came in. Who in the U.S. is managing their portfolio well? Well, I think it starts from a corporate brand strategy, and I think one of the best, besides the two that I mentioned from Whole Foods and a Target perspective, I think Fresh and Easy has an interesting banner brand strategy. They're trying to create a foothold by being a unique, by bringing a unique experience into the marketplace. So I'll be curious to see how that manifests. I also think Target's done a great job from a banner brand strategy perspective, and then utilizing that design for all and reinforcing that through their portfolio strategy. I think there's also been some activity. It'll be interesting on both, two of the U.S. national pharmacy chains, CVS and Walgreens, have done a lot of work to reorganize their portfolio, to reinforce that their product brand, to reinforce the notion that their product brand should help support the banner brand strategy. So it'll be interesting, and they have the distinct advantage of being a national retailer, right? So, so I think those are some of the retailers that are starting to do it well. So another question, can we get this presentation in print? Yeah, sure. I can send it to you via PDF if you want to shoot me an email on Carol, C-A-R-O-L, .best, B-E-S-T, at anthemww.com. So feel free to email me, and I can send it out to you. I'm happy to present it to an audience if you want me to come in as a third-party perspective. Next question. Should U.S. retailers reconsider the use of their banner brand on products? Yes. Reconsider it. With a critical lens. Is it stretching too far? Does it stand for anything beyond a cheaper alternative and parity quality? And if it does stand for something beyond that, then kudos to you. But I'd argue it may not. And that means you may have stretched it too far. Okay, it's 10:34. Okay, there's a few more questions coming in. I'll repeat my email address. Someone's asked for that. Carol, C-A-R-O-L, .best, like Best Buy, no relation, B-E-S-T, at anthem, A-N-T-H-E-M-W-W.com. And I'd love to continue the conversation too. Next question, and we posted below on the chat, thank you for doing that. We posted my email, so there it is for everyone to see. If your company does not have a strong banner brand, do you have any simple, cost-efficient ways, I guess, to change to a specific banner strategy? Yeah, talk to me. We don't come in, like I mentioned, we shouldn't have a cookie cutter approach to our portfolios. So Anthem doesn't really have a cookie cutter approach to clients' solutions. But I'd love to have a conversation with you, and we can work with you on cost-effective solutions for sure. I just need to understand where you are from a corporate strategy, business objectives, banner brand strategy, and where the business is at. You know, there's always the lens of where your key value categories are and what we need to do to make sure we keep those businesses robust, but yet put the best brand we can on shelf without sort of, you know, I'm a business person too, right? So the business needs to, there needs to be a case for the business as well. And one other question. Should U.S. retailers still have a good, better, best portfolio strategy? Well, I'd say instead of, well, I'm a visual person, so when I see good, better, best portfolio strategy, I think in terms of, I'm going to do it right on the screen here, I think in terms of rows. And there's 3, and it's good, better, best, right? So that's your price tiering strategy. And let's call it what it is. It's a price tiering strategy. I would argue that you can keep the price tiering, right? Because we know that there's different consumer needs in different price tiers. But I would also argue you need to, this is kind of hard to do, you need to create more of a matrix. And what are the columns that go to make the rows a bit more sophisticated, a bit more specific, give them a bit more meaning? And so those columns can be around consumer need states, around consumer segments, but there needs to be a consumer lens. And there, we need to provide unmet needs. We need to provide needs for her. Okay, next question. Some retailers seem to be consolidating and moving away from using the banner brand, particularly at the price value end. Got it? Is there a danger there? If you mean opening price point by the price value end, I think it depends on the retailer. Like, for example, if you're a retailer that stands for value, we all know there's a big one in Bentonville that does that, then I think there's still permission for your corporate brand or your banner brand to be on that value tier offering. Because again, it's all about reinforcing that corporate banner brand strategy. But if your banner brand stands for, like in Whole Foods case, health and wellness, then I would argue from a value perspective, you don't want your banner brand associated to that, and so therefore I would remove it. And that's just my, you know, pure brand purist perspective, really. Obviously, you need to talk to consumers, understand brand equities, understand category dynamics, but I think it all depends. I think it can't be done in isolation without considering how it reinforces the corporate and banner brand strategy. Do I think private label share will still see aggressive growth? Well, I mean, let's be honest, it's been a little flat, right? For a lot of macroeconomic reasons. Some people feel like now everyone's, you know, I just saw a presentation the other day where they're arguing that consumers are now trading back up to national brands. I think we will see growth like any other brand, national brand or retailer brand, if we innovate and if we solve for consumer needs and if we speak to her in a unique way to make her feel special. I think retailers need to start acting like real brands. I mean, why are we calling them private brands or store brands? Let's just call them brands and let's act like a brand. So let's look at our competitors like Dove would look at Olay, but let's not emulate. Let's speak to our benefits in a different, distinct way. And I think we need to innovate. I think we need to push our suppliers to innovate. And I think that's really the only way to see more aggressive growth. And that's the same for national brands, right? What do I think about NBE products? Again, it falls into that sort of price tiering. I think it depends on the category. I think there may be a place for it in your portfolio based on the consumer relationship with your banner brand and your store. But I think their point of entry, and I'd like to see this industry develop something beyond NBE products. Again, when you think about your portfolio, you know, there's sort of the blockers and the tacklers. So there could be your value alternative for that price-sensitive shopper, and just sort of, you know, blocks and tackles that way. But I still think that's not your only brand solution. You should, if you do have an NBE, you know, national brand equivalent brand in your portfolio, you should also think about developing unique brands and solving for her needs in a more sophisticated way. So SKU sale is a weakness for private brand versus national brand. Who can afford variety more than private brand? Any thoughts on economics? I'm not sure I'm understanding. Let me just read this again. SKU sale is a weakness for private brands. Are you talking unit sales? Who can afford variety more than private brands? Any thoughts on economics? I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Hey, Tim, do you mind reframing your question? Then I can give it a shot. Sorry, it's a little awkward. I wish I could just talk to you. But or if you want, you know, it's 10:41. I want to be sensitive to people's time. So Tim, if you want to email me, I'm happy to answer your question via email. Okay. Or I can give you a call if that's what you'd prefer. Okay. All right. Well, I hope this has been rewarding. And so Angela's asking if I can please restate what I said about stop calling it private brands. By the way, too, this session's being recorded, and it will be available for download on BrandSquare, FYI. But I can repeat it. I am suggesting that I'm questioning why we have sort of this prefix for our brands, right? So it's store brands or owned brands or private brands. And I think as an industry, if we just put a stop to that and just call them brands, then we'll start acting and treating them like brands. And again, Angela, I'm happy to discuss it further or help in whatever way I can. Okay, and Tim, I'll follow up with you. And thanks, everyone. And again, if you have any other questions, my email's been posted, and or you can download this again or give me a call. All right, thanks, guys. Have a good day.